"You're fired, Richard. Hand over the keys to the Henderson portfolio." Bradley Vance smirked. I nodded, knowing he had no idea the clients were legally bound to me, and my departure would trigger an immediate exit clause that would empty his fund. They thought they were eliminating a compliance bottleneck and saving on my commission payout. They did not realize they were severing the legal lifeline of their entire fund operations. The company was my life's work, but the rules they broke would become their own undoing. I had spent 20 long years walking the quiet, carpeted corridors of Vance Wealth Management, a premier financial advisory firm situated in the center of Boston. I joined the firm in 2006, right before the financial markets collapsed under the weight of the subprime mortgage crisis. Back then, the founder, Richard Vance Sr., managed only $100 million for a handful of local business owners. He hired me because I had a reputation for client retention, technical analysis, and deep market knowledge. Over the next 2 decades, we worked side by side to build the firm's assets under management to $1.5 billion. I was the architect of that growth, establishing the key relationships that brought in our largest institutional clients. I was the person who stayed late, analyzed the risk profiles, and made sure our investment strategies aligned with our clients' long-term goals. The clients didn't trust Vance Wealth Management. They trusted me. They trusted my hands-on approach and my commitment to protecting their wealth. I was the one who personally monitored the market fluctuations, adjusted asset allocations, and provided reassurances during economic downturns. For 20 years, I lived and breathed this firm. I sacrificed weekends, family holidays, and personal time to ensure that our clients felt secure and valued. My name was synonymous with reliability, and my reputation was the foundation upon which the firm's growth was built. Every client contract, every regulatory filing, and every operational success had my signature stamped on it. To manage a portfolio of this size, you need more than just investment models. You need a foundation of absolute trust. My primary responsibility was overseeing our largest clients, including the Henderson family portfolio, valued at $200 million, and the Oregon Public Employees Pension Fund, which allocated $250 million to our management. These 2 clients alone accounted for nearly a third of our total assets under management and generated over $5 million in annual fees. My credentials were the sole legal anchor for these relationships. I held the Series 7, Series 24, and Series 65 licenses, and my personal Central Registration Depository Number, CRD 482019, was registered with the SEC as the qualifying portfolio manager for these institutional accounts. I knew every trustee, every board member, and every family member by name. I knew their risk tolerances, their income requirements, and their estate plans. I had spent countless dinners, weekend phone calls, and quarterly reviews building these relationships, ensuring that their assets were managed with the highest level of care. They relied on me to navigate complex tax regulations, volatile interest rates, and global market shifts. I was not just a portfolio manager to them. I was a trusted advisor who had helped secure their financial legacy for generations. But the firm's culture changed when Richard Vance Sr. passed away in 2024. His son, Bradley Vance, inherited the controlling 51% voting interest. Bradley was 32, possessed an expensive Ivy League MBA, and was convinced that relationships were an outdated concept. He believed that proprietary algorithms and automated systems could replace decades of human experience. Bradley didn't want to manage client wealth. He wanted to cash out. Within months of taking over, he partnered with Elias Cole, a director at Vanguard Capital, a private equity group that purchased a minority stake in the company. Together, they began preparing the firm for a buyout by Apex Financial Group, a national financial services conglomerate. The proposed acquisition value was $120 million. At that valuation, my 8% founder's equity option was worth $9.6 million. It was supposed to be my retirement package, a reward for 20 years of dedication. I had planned my life around this exit, looking forward to a peaceful retirement, knowing that the firm I helped build would continue to thrive under new ownership. However, Bradley and Elias saw my equity and my annual commission as expenses that decreased the firm's profitability and lowered the acquisition price. They wanted to seize my equity and hand my accounts to Bradley's college friends, who had no experience in institutional wealth management. To achieve this, they needed to remove me before the Apex due diligence team arrived. They spent months trying to find a reason to fire me, but my compliance record was spotless. They didn't realize that in their haste to push me out, they were ignoring the terms of the contracts. When I structured the investment agreements for the Henderson portfolio and the Oregon Pension Fund, I had insisted on the inclusion of Clause 14C, a key man provision. This clause stated that if Richard Caldwell ceased to be the designated lead portfolio manager for any reason, the clients had the right to terminate their agreements immediately with zero exit penalties and transfer their assets to any custodian or new advisor. Bradley had never read the contracts. He only saw the revenue and got greedy. I saw the storm approaching, and I prepared my response, making sure that my backup systems were fully operational. I had spent my entire career preparing for market downturns, but I had never expected that the greatest threat to my client's security would come from within the firm itself. I had to protect my clients, and I had to protect my own legacy. The conflict reached its peak on a rainy Friday afternoon in late October. I was called into the glass-walled executive conference room on the top floor of our building. The room was cold, the gray sky outside casting long, dark lines across the polished conference table. Bradley Vance sat at the head of the table, wearing a tailored Italian suit that looked too large for his thin frame. Beside him was Elias Cole, the private equity director, and Gregory Vance, the firm's external corporate counsel. A single manila folder sat in the center of the table. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of rain tapping against the double-paned glass. I knew this meeting was not a routine discussion. The faces of the men across the table were closed, their eyes focused on the documents in front of them. I took a seat and waited for them to begin, my posture calm and composed. "Richard, we've recently conducted an internal audit of our digital access logs," Bradley began, his voice flat and rehearsed, trying to project authority. "Our security team discovered that proprietary portfolio models and client asset data were downloaded to an external drive from your user credentials last Tuesday night. This is a direct violation of SEC Regulation SEP and a breach of your confidentiality agreement. The board has voted to terminate your employment for cause, effective immediately." I looked at the documents inside the folder. The allegations were a complete fabrication. On Tuesday night, I was at dinner celebrating my wife's birthday, and my multi-factor authentication token was in my pocket. They had clearly used administrative access to stage the login and download the files to create a paper trail. By terminating me for cause, they could invoke the bad leaver clause in my partnership agreement, which canceled my 8% equity option and allowed the firm to buy back my shares at book value, which was a mere $100,000. They were trying to steal $9.6 million of my hard-earned equity. They had calculated that the legal fees to fight this would exhaust my resources, forcing me to accept whatever small settlement they offered. They believed that my fear of regulatory investigations would keep me quiet, allowing them to pocket my shares and present a clean company profile to the Apex due diligence team. It was a calculated, cold-blooded maneuver designed to destroy my career and save them millions of dollars. "This is a fabricated report." "Bradley," I said, keeping my voice quiet and steady. "I was not in the office on Tuesday night, and my authentication token has never left my possession. You and Elias staged this breach to avoid paying out my equity option before the Apex merger." Gregory Vance, the corporate counsel, leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "The digital footprint is clear, Richard. If we proceed with a public termination for cause, it will be logged on your Form U-5. That will ruin your reputation in the industry and make it impossible for you to work at another firm. However, the company is willing to offer you a settlement. If you sign this voluntary separation agreement, waiving your equity options and all claims for wrongful termination, the company will agree not to report this incident to the regulators and will pay you a lump sum of $200,000. It is a very generous offer under the circumstances, and it allows you to walk away with your clean record intact. I looked at the settlement agreement. They thought they had cornered me. They expected me to panic, to sign the paper to protect my career, and to walk away quietly. They didn't understand that the regulations they were attempting to bypass were the very tools I would use to dismantle their plans. I stood up, left the unsigned agreement on the table, and looked Bradley Vance in the eye. "I will not sign this," I said, "and I will not accept a termination based on false allegations." "Then you are leaving with nothing," Bradley sneered, his corporate mask slipping to reveal his anger. "Security will escort you to your desk to pack your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes to leave the building." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked back to my office, packed my personal photos, my favorite coffee mug, and my framed licenses into a single cardboard box. The security guard stood by my door, looking embarrassed. I walked out of the building and into the rain. I got into my car and drove home. I knew that by Monday morning, the consequences of Bradley's greed would begin to unfold, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. My 20 years of dedication were dismissed in 15 minutes, but the legal framework I had constructed would speak for itself. I drove home through the traffic, my mind focused on the steps I needed to take next. The road ahead was clear, and I knew exactly what had to be done to protect my clients and hold Bradley accountable. I sat at my desk at home on Saturday morning, looking out at the autumn leaves falling in the garden. I opened my personal laptop and logged into the SEC's Investment Advisor Registration Depository portal. My registration credentials were tied directly to my personal CRD number, CRD 482019, allowing me independent access separate from Vance Wealth Management servers. First, I filed my individual Form U5 disassociation notice. I registered the termination of my association with Vance Wealth Management, noting that my departure was effective as of Friday afternoon. In the explanations section, I did not remain silent. I detailed the false data breach allegations and stated that the termination was an attempt by the firm's leadership to cancel my vested equity options prior to a corporate buyout. I also filed a formal whistleblower report with the SEC's Compliance Division, detailing the firm's attempt to falsify security logs. I selected Section 7 as the reason for termination, which opened a text field requiring a detailed explanation. I wrote a concise, factual narrative of the events, specifying that the firm's management had attempted to manufacture a data breach in order to trigger bad lever clauses and avoid equity obligations. I provided the specific logs from my own secondary backup drive, which proved my physical location and lack of connection to the firm's servers during the alleged breach. I knew that the regulators would take these allegations seriously, especially with a major merger pending. The automated systems of the regulatory portal accepted my submissions and immediately updated the central registration depository, flagging the firm's profile with an active dispute. Next, I opened my personal email and contacted Marcus Henderson, the trustee of the Henderson Family Portfolio, and Sarah Jenkins, the director of the Oregon Public Employees Pension Fund. I had maintained close personal relationships with both of them for over 15 years. I informed them that I had been terminated from Vance Wealth Management and was no longer managing their portfolios. I explained that under Clause 14C of their investment management agreements, my departure triggered their right to terminate their contracts immediately without penalty. I wanted to make sure they understood that their assets were safe, but that the management structure at Vance had been compromised. I knew that institutional clients have zero tolerance for regulatory issues or executive drama. The response was immediate. Marcus Henderson called me within 10 minutes. "Richard, this is unacceptable," he said, his voice deep and angry. "We invested with Vance because of you, not because of Bradley or his private equity partners. If you are not managing our family's wealth, we are not keeping our assets with that firm. Where are you going?" "I have already registered a new independent advisory firm, Caldwell Capital," I told him. "The regulatory approvals were completed last month as a backup plan. I have a clearing agreement with Pershing LLC, the same custodian Vance uses. If you sign the transfer authorization, we can move the assets directly to my new firm without any market disruption. Your current holdings will remain unchanged, but the management authority will be transferred to Caldwell Capital. Send me the papers, Richard. I will sign them today, Marcus said. He was a man who valued loyalty above all else, and he had no intention of letting Bradley Vance experiment with his family's generational wealth using unproven software and unqualified advisors. Sarah Jenkins from the Oregon Pension Fund was equally decisive. The pension fund had strict covenants prohibiting them from maintaining investments with firms experiencing executive instability or regulatory disputes. Our board cannot risk having our assets managed by a firm under SEC investigation, she said. We are executing our exit clause immediately. We will transfer our $250 million allocation to your new firm on Monday morning. Our trustees will not tolerate any operational instability or ethical issues that could endanger the retirement benefits of our public employees. By Saturday night, both major clients had signed their contract termination notices and asset transfer authorizations. I submitted the documents directly to the risk management desk at Pershing LLC because I had pre-registered Caldwell Capital and established the clearing infrastructure weeks in advance. The transition process was fully prepared. The automated system at Pershing received the instructions and queued the asset transfers to execute the moment the clearinghouse opened on Monday morning. Bradley and Elias had spent weeks planning my termination, but they had not spent a single minute reviewing the client contracts or preparing for the operational fallout of my departure. They believed that the assets belonged to the firm, but they were about to learn that in our business, the assets follow the manager. I slept soundly that night, knowing that my clients were protected and that the mechanisms of my defense were in motion. The foundation of trust I had spent 2 decades building was holding strong. While Bradley's house of cards was about to face its first real test, none Monday morning at 8:30, the financial storm hit the offices of Vance Wealth Management. The trading desk was preparing for the opening bell, ready to execute weekly rebalancing orders for our institutional accounts. But when the head trader logged into the Pershing terminal, the screens flashed a yellow alert. A system message appeared on every terminal. Assess dented. Accounts undergoing custodian transfer. The head trader tried to execute a test trade for the Oregon Pension Fund, but the transaction was blocked. The system returned a strict error code. Unwassor's access. Account liquidation and transfer in progress. The trader immediately called the compliance department, but the junior staff had no answers. They tried to reach the Pershing clearing desk, and the relationship manager confirmed that they had received signed contract termination notices and asset transfer instructions from both the Henderson Family Trust and the Oregon Public Employees Pension Fund. Under the terms of the Keyman covenants, Pershing was legally obligated to freeze the accounts and begin transferring the $450 million in assets to Caldwell Capital. They could not execute any buy or sell orders, nor could they process any cash requests. The entire operational pipeline for our largest accounts was completely locked down. By 9:15, the news had spread through the office. Traders were whispering, and the sales team was staring at their screens in disbelief. The loss of $450 million in assets represented nearly a third of the firm's total AUM. But more importantly, it represented over 50% of the firm's annual revenue because these legacy accounts paid a higher advisory fee than the newer institutional portfolios. The firm's valuation was based on these revenues, and without them, the business was no longer worth the $120 million Apex Financial had agreed to pay. The trading floor was in a state of complete confusion, with phones ringing constantly as clients and brokers demanded answers. Bradley Vance and Elias Cole were huddled in the executive office, trying to reach Pershing, but the clearinghouse refused to speak with them without my authorization. At 9:30, the due diligence team from Apex Financial Group arrived at our offices. The team was led by Helen Thorne, a senior managing director, known for her thoroughness. She walked into the conference room and immediately noticed the tense atmosphere. Within minutes, she accessed the public ARD portal and saw my filed Form U-5 and the pending disassociation of my CRD number. She also saw the whistleblower report status. Helen walked straight into Bradley Vance's office, where he was screaming at the IT director. "Bradley, we have a major issue," she said, his voice cold. "Your SEC registration shows that your qualifying portfolio manager has been terminated, and Pershing has confirmed that 40% of your active revenue is being transferred to a new entity called Caldwell Capital. This is a material change in the business under Section 5.2 of our merger agreement. Apex is suspending the acquisition immediately. We will not purchase a firm that has lost its key assets and is facing an SEC compliance investigation. We are withdrawing our offer, and our legal team will be contacting you regarding the misrepresentations in your disclosure documents. You have failed to maintain the core assets of this company." Bradley's face went completely white. He ran to his desk and dialed my phone number. I let it ring. He called 3 more times, his calls becoming increasingly desperate. I finally answered on the 5th attempt. "Richard, what did you do?" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "The clearing terminals are frozen. Apex is threatening to pull the merger. You have to call Pershing and stop the transfer. You are destroying this firm." "I didn't destroy the firm, Bradley," I said calmly. "You did when you decided to stage a fake security breach to steal my equity. The clients exercised their rights under Clause 14C. They chose to follow me. I no longer have any association with your company." I hung up the phone, listening to the silence of my home office. The consequences of his greed had arrived, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. He had triggered the exact mechanism that would dismantle his inheritance, and he had done it to himself. He had believed that power came from ownership, but he was learning that in wealth management, authority comes from the trust of the clients. Without that trust, he had nothing but an empty office and a mountain of legal liabilities. At 10:30, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the name of Donald Henderson, the chairman of the board of directors and the oldest brother of the late Richard Vance Sr. I answered on the second ring. "Richard, please tell me there is a way to resolve this," Donald said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The board has just held an emergency meeting. If Apex walks away from this acquisition, the firm will be ruined. We cannot survive the loss of both the Henderson and Oregon portfolios. The legal liabilities from the failed merger will drive us into bankruptcy. The board is prepared to take immediate action to stabilize the company. What are your terms to return?" "I will not return as an employee, Donald," I replied, "but I will discuss a resolution under these terms, which are non-negotiable. First, Bradley Vance and Elias Cole must be terminated from the firm immediately for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Second, the board must issue an official written statement retracting the false data breach allegations against me. Third, the firm must pay me a wrongful termination settlement of $500,000. Fourth, my 8% founder's equity option must be fully reinstated and paid out at the original merger valuation of $9.6 million. Finally, Caldwell Capital will act as an external sub-advisor to Vance Wealth Management for a transition period of 12 months for a monthly fee of $30,000 paid up front. These terms must be approved and executed by the board before the market closes today. If these requirements are not met, the asset transfer to my new firm will proceed, and Vance Wealth Management will be left with an empty shell." Donald sighed. He sounded like a man who had watched his entire life savings flash before his eyes in a single morning. He knew that the regulatory pressure, combined with the imminent loss of the Henderson and Oregon portfolios, would destroy any credibility the firm had left in the market. "The board has no choice, Richard. Bradley is already being removed from the building. We will accept your terms. The legal counsel is drafting the agreement now. We will wire the settlement and the first month's advisory fee to your bank account within the hour. We want to ensure that the transition is seamless and that our clients are satisfied." I contacted my attorney, who reviewed the settlement agreement to ensure it was legally binding. By noon, the wire transfer of $530,000 had cleared my account. I signed the sub-advisory agreement and contacted Pershing LLC, instructing them to establish a sub-advisory relationship that allowed the Henderson and Oregon portfolios to be managed through my new firm, while keeping the clearing infrastructure intact for the duration of the transition. This allowed the Apex due diligence team to resume their review, satisfied that the portfolio remained under my direct management, and the legal disputes were resolved. The transition was executed smoothly, with no disruption to client trades or account balances. On Tuesday morning, Bradley Vance was escorted from the corporate offices by security, his personal belongings packed in a cardboard box. His career in the financial industry ended by his own greed. His Form U-5 now contained a permanent record of his termination for gross negligence and compliance violations, ensuring he would never work in a registered financial institution again. Elias Cole was recalled to Vanguard Capital, his reputation ruined and his partnership options canceled. The board of directors issued a formal apology to me, which was circulated to all employees and regulatory bodies, fully exonerating me of any wrongdoing. The merger with Apex Financial Group closed the following month at the original valuation of $120 million. My 8% equity option was paid out in full, and the $9.6 million was deposited into my account. I returned to the office as an independent sub-advisor, sitting in my old corner room, looking out at the city skyline. I had spent 20 years building the business, and when they tried to push me out, they realized that the assets did not belong to the building, but to the person who had earned the client's trust. In the world of finance, contracts are important, but relationships are the ultimate leverage. I looked at the harbor below, the ships moving slowly through the water, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I had protected my clients, secured my retirement, and proved that integrity is the most valuable asset of all.